Welcome to the Explainer. Today we're doing more than just reviewing a study. We're going to break down the WJOG10317L trial. Sure, but really, we're using it as a masterclass, a framework for how you and I can look at any clinical trial and ask that one crucial question. Is this actually practice-changing?
Okay, so this is the core question, right? It's a classic clinical crossroads we all face. You've got a patient with PD-L1 low or negative non-small cell lung cancer. They've progressed through their first-line platinum chemo. Now what? Do you go with immunotherapy or do you reach for chemo? This is the exact dilemma the WJOG10317L study was designed to solve.
All right, here's how we'll break it down. We'll start with the problem itself, then get into the trial design. We'll look at the results, the stats versus the real meaning, and a huge complicating factor, the crossover. Then we'll ask the big question, is this practice changing? And wrap up with the clinical bottom line.
So let's kick things off by setting the stage. Why was this trial even needed when it was designed?
So here's the deal. After that first-line platinum-based chemo fails, you're looking at two totally different but both standard options. You've got your immune checkpoint inhibitor, Addit's Elizabeth, and you've got your chemo combo, docetaxel plus ramucirumab. The problem? We were flying a bit blind. No one had actually compared them head-to-head in a trial for this specific group of patients. It was a true clinical equipoise.
All right, let's get into the nitty-gritty, because, a trial is only as good as its design. So before we even glance at the results, let's pop the hood and see exactly what they were testing.
And it was a pretty simple setup, a real head-to-head battle. Arm A got the ICI atezolizumab, and Arm B got the chemo combo, docetaxel and ramucirumab. Clean and simple.
So who were they studying? Patients with advanced NSCLC, post-platinum chemo, good performance status, and this is the key part, PD-L1 negative or low expression, so between 1 and 49%. Now, as you look at this, the big question you have to ask yourself is, do these patients look like my patients? How well does this match who I see in my clinic?
And right here, this is the trial's Achilles heel. It's a perfect example of how fast oncology moves, right? While they were trying to enroll patients for this second-line study, bam, ICIs get approved for first-line therapy. The patient pool just dried up. So they had to shut it down early. They planned for 420 patients, but only got 70. And that is a huge deal we have to keep in mind for everything that followed.
Okay, so let's just state the obvious. This study is seriously underpowered. But with that massive asterisk next to everything, what did the data actually show? Are there any signals we can tease out from these 70 patients?
Let's kick off with objective response rate. And wow, just look at that difference. It is night and day. Over 35% for the chemo arm versus just 5.6% for the atezo arm. I mean, that's not even a close fight. It's a knockout win for the chemo combo right out of the gate.
And you might think, well, it's only 70 patients, but this was statistically significant, like highly significant, with a p-value of 0.002. So there's no way around it. The chemo combo was just way, way better at shrinking tumors.
And that story continues when we look at progression-free survival. The chemo arm kept the cancer at bay for a median of 5.5 months. The immunotherapy arm, just 1.5 months. Again, a clear, statistically significant win for chemotherapy.
Okay, so chemo is winning on response rate. It's winning on PFS. It looks like a clean sweep, right? But did any of this actually matter for the big one? The primary endpoint, overall survival. Did these early wins actually help patients live longer?
And here is the big twist in the story. When you look at overall survival, there was basically no difference. 15.8 months for chemo, 17.1 months for the ICI. Statistically, that's a wash. The survival curves are practically sitting right on top of each other. So what happened?
And this is the central puzzle of the whole trial, isn't it? The chemo was better at shrinking tumors, it was better at delaying progression, but it didn't help patients live any longer. How is that possible? How did the treatment that looked worse up front end up with the same survival?
Well, the answer, or at least a big clue, seems to be hiding in the crossover design. Remember, patients were allowed to switch to the other treatment arm when they progressed, and what happened after they switched, that might be the most fascinating finding in this whole paper.
It all comes down to the sequence. Let's walk through this. Patients who started on atezo, then switched to chemo, their PFS after the switch was a whopping 6.7 months. That's fantastic for a third-line therapy. But now look at the other group. They started on chemo, then switched to the ICI. Their PFS? Just 2 months. The difference is huge, and it leads to this really provocative idea. Does giving an ICI first somehow prime the tumor to make it more sensitive to chemo later on?
Okay, so let's take a step back and see where we are. We've got conflicting results, right? Chemo gives a better initial response, but there's no difference in overall survival. And then we have this really interesting, kind of tantalizing signal about sequencing. So what do we do with all this? How does this translate to the clinic on a Tuesday morning?
First things first, let's talk toxicity. And no surprises here, the chemo arm was tougher on patients. More neutropenia, more thrombocytopenia. But check out the febrile neutropenia rate. It's actually pretty low. Why? Because almost everybody on the chemo arm, 92% of them, got G-CSF prophylaxis. So that's a really important practical tidbit to file away.
But in the end, we have to look at all of this through a very critical lens. Let's be honest about the limitations. The study was cut short. It's massively underpowered. The whole clinical question is a bit dated now that ICIs are used up front. And that crossover design totally muddies the water for the OS data. So bottom line, you absolutely cannot use this to write new guidelines. It's just not that kind of stuff.
So after pulling apart this messy, flawed, but let's face it, pretty fascinating study, what's the clinical bottom line? What can you and I actually take away from this?
I think it boils down to 3 key points. 1, this trial does not give us a winner on overall survival. The debate isn't over. 2, if you have a patient who's really sick, really symptomatic, and you need a response now, this data suggests the chemo combo is your more reliable bet for that upfront punch. And 3, the big one. This study gives us a powerful new idea to think about, the priming hypothesis. The possibility that giving an ICI first might really set the stage for chemo to work better later.
And that really leaves us with the million-dollar question, doesn't it? Does immunotherapy truly prime tumors for later chemo? This little study hints that, yeah, maybe it does, but it's just a hint. And it's a fantastic example of how a failed trial can still be a huge success by pointing us in a new direction. It didn't give us the answer we were looking for, but it gave us a much more interesting question. And now that question needs its own much larger trial to find the real answer.